you judge people by the end of their administration or their tenure. But the fortunate thing about this is that he has served one term before as a finance minister in the last Akufo-Addo administration. And he's currently serving his almost third year in their second term. So it's a good number or a good number of years for us to judge him. So on a scale of 10, personally I'll rate him 3. On a scale of 10, that's 30%. And my rating is not out of malice or emotions, but it's as a result of the output. Because in any economic policy that you put in, you are not just looking at the policy as in the name, you look at the output that it brings. So several policies have been rolled out by this government, and in fact the president has even had, in many occasions, admonished the spectacular performance of the finance minister and his ministers when he was asked to consider a ministerial reshuffle. So we only have one indicator now to judge, which is the output. And in judging a finance minister, you know, in economics, we have what we call monetary policy and fiscal policies. The Bank of Ghana naturally is in charge of monetary policy, and the finance minister or the finance ministry is in charge of the fiscal policies. So if you look at the fiscal policy, has revenue and expenditure measures as part of government expansionary policy measures. So let's take it one after the other. Why I gave him 30%. If you look at the revenue aspect of the fiscal policy, you realize that government consistently has been underperforming. And part of it is because, one, there's so much wastage and loss of trust on the part of Ghanaians to continuously give out sacrifices. Because if you look at the real income of average Ghanaian is worsening by the current inflation. So people do not have enough of disposable income to even pay taxes. That's why if you look at the tax defaults, it keeps on rising. If you look at the mid-year last year, government estimated to have gotten 100.5 billion Ghana cedis, but they ended around 70 billion. So it tells you that government itself is failing in its tax measures. Number two is that other expansionary policies that should have stimulated growth in the economy and expand the economy, that would be jobful and productive economy. It will generate more profit for firms, for them to pay higher corporate taxes, and other small-scale businesses would have been coming up and employing people to pay more of personal income taxes. But why is all these things declining? It means that you roll out policies, but it leads to jobless growth because people are unable to have enough income to even contribute. Now, they also fail in revenue because of waste. Recently, we all were witnesses to Honorable Ablakwa constant criticisms on the president's leisure and penchant for foreign trips in luxurious private jets, wasting an average of $14,000 per hour on side trips in return to what? When people see such wastage in the system, investors lose confidence, and you realize that the foreign direct investments keep on declining, and they are shifting income to other countries, because once you invest in this country, you realize that the monies are being wasted. And even aids and grants are on the decline because investors and foreign governments have lost confidence in our economy. So that's on the revenue front. On the expenditure aspect of it, where observers, civil society groups, and other financial institutions are always critical on the expenditure front of every government across the world. This is because judicious and prudent use of resources guarantee people to release more money to you. If you look at IAS 23, which is on borrowing, most foreign grants and aids are premised on your prudent use of financial resources. So go and look at our gift-me system and our financial management regulations. You realize that the central theme of all these things is prudence. But it will shock you to know that having received over 600 billion Ghana cedis in both tax revenue and non-tax revenue sources, this government has made the life of Ghanaians worse than before. Look, recently I was reading a report that electricity has gone up by 76%. If you look at transportation, over 42%. Food inflation is over around over 30%. So when you see things like this and relate it to the quantum of resources this government has achieved or acquired, you ask yourself, where is the money? The 2020 parliamentary candidate of the MPP gave the answer to all these questions. Where is the money? Because they said that the monies accrued to them through COVID-19 relief support from the IMF and the World Bank was used to finance political activities. So, yes, you see Ghana will use the expenditure approach in calculating our GDP. So you see that government consumption keeps on rising, but the GDP is not productive. So government spends a lot, but it is not in productive sectors. And that's how come in 2020, despite all the monies and the central bank financing that they did, we only grew by 0.4. So on the expenditure front, we are even recording more deficits. In 2020 alone, close to 15.3% budget deficit was recorded. And we are projecting that by the end of 2026, we will come down to single digit. So you ask yourself, all the flagship programs that they were touting, one village, one dam, one district, one factory, one constituency, 1 million, and all those flagship programs, when you total all expenditures out of it, plus free education, it is less than 100 billion Ghana cedis out of the 600 billion. So you ask yourself, where is the money? It's not far from getting. Apart from party financing, the Auditor General in 2021 reported that an annual of $12 billion Ghana cedis was wasted through misappropriations and fraud. So the finance minister, as part of his functions, if you look at the constitution, is to guarantee and regulate the financial sector and to ensure that Ghanaians have value for money. Go to the street and ask the average Ghanaian what their situation is as compared to how it was when this government took office. But what is the cause of all these things and the incompetence exhibited by the finance minister? It is because of family and friends. The president cannot look into the face of the finance minister and tell him the right things to do. That is how come it took the members of the majority caucus, almost about 94 of them, to speak out to the government that the future of the MPP should not be limited because of the incompetence of the finance minister. MPP is broader than any of them. But they changed their mind because I listened to a Nigerian video where a rowdy youth confronted a politician and asked, why are you no more talking? And he said, when your mouth is full, how can you talk? So for me, I believe that we are suffering economic hardship because of a decision by a president who cannot look directly into the face of his cousin and tell him the truth that your policies aren't working. Appointing the family relations ideally is not a problem because we don't expect you to appoint enemies to serve in your government. But it is compelling that selection of a family relative should rather propel development because you wouldn't want your family member to fail. But we all know across the world that cronyism breeds grounds for corruption, conflict of interest, and nepotism. When the finance minister, at the initial stage of their government until we were knocked out from the international credit market, went on a penchant of borrowing excessively from the euro market, he used his company as a bond book runners, that is consulting for issuance of bonds and all those things from the international market, and he was paid commission. There was no value for money audit on it. There was no procurement processes that was done, nothing of that sort. This could have only been possible because he is related to the president. If it was not, you realize that it would have gone through competitive bidding and would have had more value for money. President Mahama didn't even come close to this. But you yourself, you were in this country when he said President Mahama, the famous Professor Hadai, who said that the country was run by Northerners. when you could not even point up to 3 Northerners who were related to President Mahama in government. But he said that because he knew the implications of pardoning your administration with family relatives, because you cannot have the courage to talk to them when they are wrong. So for you to appoint family and friends, you must appoint people who want you to succeed and not people who want to enrich the family. So I don't have problem really with a president appointing a family person, especially when the person is qualified without any bad record and has so much accomplishment in life. My problem only starts when the president can no longer look into the face of the family member to tell him that things are not good. That's where I have problem. Every human being, especially on our part of the world, we believe that there is life after death. So when you are confronted with such questions, you need to reflect entirely to answer, because having issues with your human sometimes is better than having that with God. So I don't blame the finance minister, because that question would have been difficult. And I will give you a story. During the time of Muawiyah, after the Sayyidina Ali's administration in Mecca, Muawiyah was ruling the people and he didn't know the direction that the country was going. So he sought the honest opinion from the wife of the Prophet, which is Nana Aisha, on what he should do or how the country was being run. Do you know the advice the wife of the Prophet gave? That ruling to the satisfaction of the Almighty will guarantee stability than ruling to the whims and caprices of the people. What he simply suggests is that whatever you do, you are not only accountable to state institutions, you are also accountable to the Almighty. So for me, people think politics, there is no tomorrow. There is, because you are given the mandate of over 30 million to seek their welfare and to protect their interests. So you'll be judged. He couldn't answer the question satisfactorily because there's so much under the cupboard. And I'll demonstrate some of them. You asked for 3 most important failures I see why he couldn't answer it. First, has to do with the banking sector. Now, if you look at the banking sector, one of the critical measures we used to look at the banking sector has to do with the loan default as a percentage of the deposits. We also look at the bank assets and its liquidity, and then banking sector regulations. In all these 3, is worse than they came to meet. Look, currently, bank default rate is hovering around 46%. What it means is that when commercial banks give out loans to individuals, businesses, and small-scale firms, 46% of those loans, it doesn't come back to the banks. That brought rise to big tech companies and QR payments, because people rather now feel safe. Companies rather now feel safe that if they give through digital platforms, they earn it more than if they bring it to through commercial banks. Look at bank assets. You came to meet a robust financial sector or a robust banking sector with highly capitalized and very liquid. We had the likes of Unibank and all those banks. A 9 billion facility that could have been used to solve the problems of the banks. As we speak, we don't even know the total quantum we've even spent in collapsing those banks. The last time the finance minister said, they kept on mentioning 25 billion cedis. Something you could have used 9 billion to capitalize it. And I'll ask you a question. If you have a house and there is a leakage, do you destroy the house or you find a plumber to solve it? Now, my problem was that you accuse managers of those banks having run down banks. It means that it is not the bank that is the problem. It is the individuals. Why don't you prosecute the individuals? So the banks itself collapse gave rise to the physical rigidities we are fighting. Because First of all, banks are financial intermediaries that hold funds available for loans. We call it loanable funds. And there are businesses that are looking for opportunities for investment. So banks serve as intermediaries between individuals who are willing to lend their money and usable funds to individuals who have use for it. Because of trust and asymmetric information between the holders of the funds and the receivers of the funds, banks play that role to cure intermediary asymmetric information, so that banks will demand collateral, they will know your location, they will know more about you, and then fund holders will now have confidence to release it to the bank in order to give the loans. Now, when you collapse those banks, you deny people the opportunity to have access to enough loanable funds. And that's how come the productive sectors are collapsing, because there's no access to funds. In fact, contractors who took loans from those banks to do businesses haven't collapsed the bank. A lot of those contractors haven't still been paid. So on one breath, you are owed contractors close to 200 billion cedis. And most of these funds came from the banks. And on the other hand, you are blaming the banks for having inadequate funds or capital. Why don't you pay the contractors to fulfill their mandates with the banks? This collapse had nothing to do with recapitalization or had nothing to do with robustness of the banking sector. It has everything to do with politics. Recently, the Supreme Court ruled that the Bank of Ghana erred in collapsing the GN Bank. Unibank also got favorable court rulings on some of the decisions on UniCredit from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Bank of Ghana. So it means that the Bank of Ghana didn't take their time. They only rushed in serving the political interests of the NPP administration, because they felt that so much liquid cash was in these banks and they were afraid that those banks would be used to the advantage of the NDC. Now, if you are taking a decision, your decision is because there is a wrong and you want to right the wrong and bring a favorable outcome. Ask yourself, since the collapse of these banks, what is the outcome? The outcomes matter because your decision you take should have a direct impact on the lives of the people. People have lost their jobs as a result of this collapse. Over 50,000 people lost their jobs. Families collapsed, but people died because of those collapses. To what end? So sometimes I ask myself, the death that was occasioned, the collapse of families, the breakages of marriages are all on the head of the finance minister. Because it had nothing to do with policy, it had everything to do with political persecutions. So that is one of the legacies that he will leave with, the collapse of the bank. And you know, interestingly, though it has toned down small, when they ask them why we are suffering as a country, they say the banking cleanup. How do you clean up a banking sector that seeks to bring more confidence and more welfare sustaining policies to the people? And you rather now say that the cleanup rather brought us a hardship. Does it make sense to you? So if Ghanaians would have been better off with those states of the bank in which they are, was it not better than trying to clean it up that brought us this mess? So I think the banking sector cleanup was a charade. It was a money-milking adventure. Now look at this. When they cleaned up the banking sector, according to them, they consolidated some of the banks. The consolidated banks, till date, are not properly capitalized. So what is the purpose of the cleanup? Loss of jobs, families were destroyed, and yet there is no remarkable output that we can see. So that's one of the reasons why I don't forgive the finance minister. And for me, it only served their interest because when NDC was in government, go and look at the capital stock of Data Bank or Enterprise Group as a group and look at their capital today. So what it means is that These people only collapsed those banks to give rise to his people. Now, Data Bank is part of book runners. When the NDC passed the Banking Act, the amended Banking Act, one of the criteria that in establishing a bank was to have 200 capital requirement, 200 million Ghana cedis capital requirement. This was a way of making sure that people do not just come and set up banks, receive deposits, and run away with it. So for you to even acquire 200 million sitting in the coffers of the Bank of Ghana, it means that in case of collapse of the bank, depositors' funds can be settled with that money. I hope you are getting it. You have to go and deposit 200 million Ghana cedis with the Bank of Ghana as your capital requirement. Then you start running your bank. In case of bank collapse or bankruptcy, the Bank of Ghana comes in as a lender of last resort to take care of depositors. Do you get the point? Now, the second thing was that the NDC government did asset quality review, where they went around all their banks and did asset quality to ensure that banks were not just existing on paper, but banks were meeting regulatory requirements. And the report is there. In fact, as part of the handing over notes, the NDC government handed over these reports to the government. But I'm saying that they are not interested. The second reason I will not forgive the finance minister and the MPP is the appetite for borrowing, the excessive borrowing. Look, until recently, I thought borrowing was a crime because I studied economics. I did chartered economics and chartered accountant. And even in my PhD, we all know borrowing and its implications. But Dr. Baumia and the MPP government redefined the concept of borrowing for us to suggest that if governance was all about borrowing, then their 9-year-old children could govern this country. Little did we expect that when they come, they will do worse than they were. In fact, they preach virtues but practice vices. Look, the 8-year mandate of the NDC government from 2009 to 2016 borrowed only $3 billion. In 4 years of these people, they crossed 11 billion in the euro market. Look, to stimulate investment that will generate growth, jobs, and all those things, private sector participation is key. Is that not it? Despite these people borrowing in the international market, they crowded out small firms in this country by borrowing the usable funds for investment in our domestic economy. That gave rise to what we call the domestic exchange program or the debt exchange program. Now, pensioners and other people have excess funds, and they've kept it in fund managers, in banks, so that it will bring in little returns for them to take care of their families. It means that banks will have excess liquidity, because in banks, when you have the required margin or the required that you have to keep for deposits or daily withdrawals, the rest is loanable. Bank of Ghana and the government came out with government stocks and bonds and treasury bills and borrowed all those excess funds. So small firms couldn't even access money for business. So that's why I said that if you look at the computation of GDP, we have consumption, investment, government spending, and the next export. That's export minus import. Now, on one breath, investments, you can have your GDP growing, but investment will be declining. Because if government borrows from you, they spend. So government gene column or the government spending will go up, but at the same time, investment will what? Will go down. So you may see your GDP growing, but it is not growing properly. And that is the current situation. Recently, I heard the finance ministry saying that the first quarter grew by 4.7. Yes, it may grow by 4.7 as a result of excessive government spending, but not in the reality. So this government appetite for borrowing has brought us here. Look, one bad thing that brings this country down is our deficit and our excessive borrowing. Because government is in a hole. When you are in a hole, you don't keep digging to come out. What do? You stop the digging. This government hasn't stopped anything. Now, they've admitted that the borrowing were excessive. And you know the justification they are telling us? They borrowed to finance expenditures during COVID. When this government has actually received close to 30 billion Ghana cedis in the fight against COVID. COVID success rate, number of deaths, and number of cases. Our African peers are all performing better than us, but they are not in debt exchange program. We receive more external support in the fight of COVID than any of our African neighbors, but they are not in debt exchange program. The average pensioner who has dedicated life and service to this country cannot rest in a period of retirement. Do you think those people will ever forgive this finance minister? Currently, the Bank of Ghana projects that we should be expecting debt to GDP ratio of above 100% in the next 4 years. What it simply means is that if you put all our GDP together, it is not enough to pay our debt. And you know that GDP is not accountable to only Ghanaians. In fact, foreign nationals working in this country repatriate their profit, but we capture all of them as our GDP. So you see that we look at the real GDP itself, or national GDP, net national GDP, that will demonstrate what we have. But we don't use it. We'd rather say GDP, because we realize that foreign businesses are in Ghana, so their monies are what? Part of our GDP calculation. But that doesn't guarantee that it will inure to the benefit of the ordinary citizen. So they've borrowed their way out. In the cocoa sector, also there's a debt exchange program. Maturing cocoa payments have now been asked to come and subscribe to an exchange program and defer payments to 2024 and 2025. In the cocoa sector, when did you ever hear the cocoa sector suffering like this? Where people the cocoa farmers are the ordinary Ghanaian. They've delivered the cocoa to you, and you are telling that payment will be due in 2024 and 2025. Where is the 1 billion syndicated facility we always take? You are not even doing cocoa rows that will say that you spent it on cocoa rows. So these people, borrowing is what has brought us here. And the appetite for borrowing were occasioned by the fact that Data Bank was a book runner. And Black Star, the one for the former Minister of State in charge of finance. So my point is that the excessive borrowing on the part of the finance minister, in fact, the only revenue measure he knows is borrowing. You remember the luxury vehicle tax he brought? He didn't think through it. That is why 1 year afterwards, they had to remove it, because it was not generating the needed revenue they thought it would bring. They told us that their penchant for borrowing will stop once we allow them to pass e-levy. They passed e-levy. As a result of loss of confidence, Ghanaians didn't give them the needed resources. So my point is that his only revenue measure is to borrow, and irrespective of the cost of borrowing. Because every economy, one criteria in borrowing is you look at the cost of capital. That's the cost of borrowing. He doesn't care. Countries are borrowing at 1%, countries are borrowing at 3%. This gentleman is borrowing sometimes at 9%, 12%. And he doesn't care about how the payments will be done, because they will not be in government in 2025. So my point is that the second reason why I don't like him is because of the borrowing aspect. The appetite for borrowing is too much. And the large elephant-sized government is also part of the problem. Now the third reason why the MPP government, I don't forgive this finance minister, has to do with honesty. They are not honest to us. Look, let's go to the energy sector. This government claimed that excess power, they paid 17 billion Ghana cedis in excess power. When in actual fact, when you do the decomposition of those 17 billion, you realize that part of those monies have been paid for fuel to power the power plants. And who does the power? A company that was formed by them. SCACOM. Second thing too is that they use it to pay for independent power producers for having supplied power. And then, of course, the third is to use to pay part of the legacy debt. Now, if President Mahama's signings of the energy sector equipment was a crime, why have they extended the Ameri power agreements? Why are they extending the car power agreements? So, honesty is key. One thing that engenders confidence or that gives trust and mandate to legitimate mandate to the government should be what? Honesty. Ghanaians have lost trust in them. Go and do, if you look at the Afrobarometer reports, you realize that the confidence on this government or where the country is headed is on the decline. This government is not honest. And arrogance. Despite being honest, you may not be honest but humble. They are not honest, and on top of it, they are arrogant. They feel like they know it all. They are not available for advice. They are not available for suggestions. In fact, recently, President Mahama held a town hall meeting at UPSC where he catalogued numerous measures that he thinks will be of importance to them. What did we get in return? Vilifications, insults. We need to consider nation building as a collective. The hardship doesn't affect only the NDC. It affects most of their members too. Only a select few who are benefiting from this tyrant administration are those enjoy it. So for me, these are the three reasons why the finance minister has woefully failed and he couldn't answer the questions.
And that's Ataisa. He's a member of parliament. The candidate for Nararigu seeking to oust some other persons. Now, Niwa Kenyinani said finance minister Kenneth Oriata idea we di Ghana here mopa because social your minor baby drew ye ne me no me nu ye ka Ghana ho asema na che say wan beboa Ghana kra ne santi no odenya me bia tutu dwa che say wan boa no but embraso say embra Ghana ban airborrow and nya ntie say the public debt no is over 5 billion. So you know what that means. That means this can aye kojo. But seni aye kojo now also apomudi enye kojo now also unko do that level. Yeah, do better stretch us on it there. Quite abe here pan say ube fa wapomudi very serious because the economy na be do no unisika na wapomudi sanso embeye ne ewo ho dia na che say okoya na obae ne senti ne the virgin doctor abafi ha say onkan wapomudi ho asem che se ne esunya na no me kofi na mami otimi say nyansa na danu na wo kana mechi bremu na me nipedua ye me no fo sa na me kope ye Lawson heba me say bi no me na me say na nupe ene manya me ho adaje a me ginagina me na so the virgin doctor ofia the virgin doctor
100 Ghana cedis.
Virgin doctor
200 cedis.
the virgin doctor
300 Ghana
the royal blackness as I'm no atadi ya pekra
say me boy you na me feel ntino continue there obafia we different yeah next week I say with me bro so thank you anyway
many veggie so virgin doctor many veggie bruta any easy ka
so we
the virgin doctor Adansidin de Bubuja say losing heba Mr. na Lord ke heba Mr. Dileman kasene memma edi ho adanse wo de adansidin wan kasa ka bi chen na fa edro no se nyeti no fatudwa
meda ahwefo ase meda etiefo ase Dr. Lawson the virgin doctor and amoteminka ene anope na de me pese Ghana for eti ase ni say ye bibia ye no Ghana ha o mem ha bia o se ye nya gidie ye nya rehyimu se eye papa nti na me kasa hwe ye ne aye local rice ya ye ukotamale a